right. Welcome to the Barkada Podcast. This is episode 21, if you can believe it. It's been a minute since we had our last episode, but we're here with my friend, Mr. Kurt Stein. What's up, man?
I'm happy to be here. It's a beautiful, rainy Oshkosh day.
I know, right? And the weather was starting to look super nice, and then now we have like this super long stretch now of like off and on rain. But I guess we needed it.
It's better than the humidity. My Viking physique is not built for this jungle heat, as I like to say.
Right? Oh, shoot. I forgot to reveal my shirt.
He's sporting the Burt shirt. I know that guy.
Yeah. Be sure to say, when's the last time you saw Burt?
I haven't seen Burt in a couple years now, honestly. He's been under wraps. He buried himself again. But, Burt Klein definitely kind of needs to make an appearance again. I think he's a little overdue and literally rolling over in his grave. Yeah,
he's been we haven't seen him.
No, he
must not like COVID.
He doesn't like COVID, and he's just, I think he needs to, Burt is an interesting character, just as a character, but also as a personal device. Not to cross any lines here, but it's very fascinating I think everyone in their lives should get in a day to scream and rant and yell whatever they wish to a bunch of family and friends, and then get that feedback. And it's quite a cathartic, esoteric, full body release, and that's something that I could use right now. I mean, Burt always seems to know how to talk that out of me.
Sure. Yeah. We should, I don't know, is there anything that in the summer that Burt can do?
I don't know. He's been working on some stuff. Like, before he locked himself away, he's been working on, he helped pen the Dirty Song Fake Book, which is a real book. And he was going over his collection of, left out, with his other things I want to talk about, was a book on the Oxford Book of Sea Songs, and this old dirty fake book, and a bunch of other weird jazz charts from the 30s and 40s that are a little bit more risque that he helped pen, he says. But there's a potential for a new kind of a historical Burt show, showing off the sleaze and vulgarity that has always been there in music since the beginning of time. So that's something I know he was working on, but don't want to bother that guy too much, because once he wakes up, it's hard to make him go to sleep again.
Right. A little bit of an off season for him, so it's his rest time. Awesome. Man, we go way back, and we can probably date ourselves here a little bit, but we first met probably over at the university, right? I'm guessing.
At least over 20 years ago, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I met you through Adam, because I'd been playing some gigs with Adam when both of us were first starting to gig with, like, Jim Hart, doing the Hart shows, and big love to Jim Hart right now. Hope he's recovering best as possible, and we love that guy in the music and theater community around here. But I was working for Jim Hart, and Adam and I were good buddies, and then you and Adam were like lifelong best friends, and then that's how I knew, through the university, that's how we ran into each other. And
did you and Adam work somewhere together?
No, we just played we played like the patent leather shoes, really reflect up and things like that. We did dinner theater together, like when we were first starting to gig. And a good story is I have sleep apnea, so I didn't know that at that time. So I used to fall asleep just whenever, and my snore can, like, in this building would just echo for hours and hours, but people would not get any rest. So I had sleep apnea at the time, and when you play those music theater gigs and you're in the pit, like, it gets really, like, by the last show you really got it dialed in, and we're doing dinner theater, and we're behind like a curtain, and I remember it was me and Adam and Nate Kinzel and a couple other people, and I was playing bass, and I was sitting in a chair, and there's this really long monologue at the end, and I nodded off with my bass, like, and Adam's like, "Kurt!" I'm like, what? I woke up, like, ready to play bass again. So at least I don't do that anymore. Like, I
figured out.
Sleep 4 or 5 hours a night, but the rest is easy.
Yeah. So for those of you who don't know, we were both at the university here, You're recording and business, or just
recording and music business, and philosophy and religious studies. But so I got enough credits to be a professor, just not in one area. I was in school for a while. Hence we're a few years apart, and I was still there. Yeah. So I just try to take every class that interested me. I'm as Professor Bean, who was a religious studies professor at UWO and an awesome guy, used to say, you have to be like a hungry dog in a meat factory for information. And I've always been like that. If I find a subject, I don't care about grades. I don't care about wealth. I am passionate about passion. Yeah. And that gets me off more than anything else. And it always has been, you know.
And the funny story is you were there long enough too where you literally were like handing me the keys.
Oh,
the keys that you had. But how did you end up with those keys, by the way?
Well,
because they were like the keys to everything in that building.
Yes, I had. Now that everyone is not there anymore, and everything, it doesn't matter. But much love to like Jim Grine and Rob McWilliams and Wally Mester and all the guys that we would pull this stuff on. But some great college hijinks is I had the record. Wally had a couple of recording positions that you got to record the concerts, and you got to go to Alberta Kimball and bring the remote rig and record the orchestra and stuff. So when I wasn't playing in it, that's what I would do. And then to do that, you needed keys to the building, but I had keys to every part of the AC building almost. Yes. And they were I was the only guy who had them, but people knew I had them. So like, again, I don't think I can get in trouble for this. There's no cameras on anything, but like say, one Thanksgiving, some high school friends of mine were in town and we wanted to jam, so we went and jammed on the stage on the concert in the music hall because no one was there over Thanksgiving break, and then we had keys to get into the studio anytime we needed to do it, and then another notorious star, Rob McWilliams. If you happen to watch this, here's a great one. Shout
out to Rob.
Fun story about Rob McWilliams, fantastic trumpet player and piano player and professor. Real quick segue, I have a friend who plays with Chris Hoffman, who was a buddy of ours from college, who is in New York now and is a cellist and engineer and filmmaker. He plays in a couple of really awesome bands, and one is Anat Cohen's band, and the trumpet player in that band is a good friend of mine named Nad, and she's, or Nod, but Nod's a really awesome trumpet player and a heck of a friend, and really has been good to me. We've never met in person. We just know each other online. Yep. But she's Australian and went back to Australia over COVID. Yeah. And Rob, who's our old professor, is originally from Australia and went back there and is also a trumpet player. Mm-hmm. I set them up on a lunch date. Okay. And they hung out and talked trumpet when she was teaching clinics in his town.
That's cool, man.
Back to school, we had the keys, and I think it was Mark Martin's keyboard broke down. So good old Mark Martin, left-handed, a great, piano player buddy of ours. He would notoriously break the keys on his keyboards and smash the left, he'd have 3 or 4 keys that wouldn't work, and then he'd have to take it apart and fix it or go somewhere and fix it. Notoriously, he'd have like 3 broken at one time. Mm-hmm. So, and he had no license at the time. So it was always like people giving him rides around. Oh man, those were the days.
Oh, I remember that.
But Mark didn't have a keyboard, so we used those keys to go grab a giant jazz band keyboard that had been sitting in the thing for whatever, and then we used it on gigs for about 3 to 6 months. And Rob, I'm sorry you even came down to the Jazz Orgy at Peabody's and played on that keyboard, and we were really worried because it literally said property of UWO Music Hall on top of it, or the music department. And then I was already out of school and had handed these precious keys off to Marlo. Like, they were too cool to not pass along, and it also stopped me from graduating for a while. But so I gave them off to Marlo, so somebody had access to the beauty of the AC building and the studio at any time they needed, because it was also very handy because you had to get studio keys. So if you knew I was around and you had studio time and needed to get in, I could also get you in. So there was benefits to the student populace. Yeah. In some way. But all of a sudden there was an announcement at Convocation that we're missing a keyboard and who has stolen that keyboard and whatever. And the students younger than us didn't know this either. And it was kind of an uproar and whatever. Yeah. So we just snuck that keyboard back in the middle of the night, like a week later, and put it back in that building what's that room? I can't remember the number on it, but the one that was behind the orchestra band room there, and then we would just put it back in there, and then they found it. So those were the days for sure.
Now I wonder if there's anything that can be done now that we've aired our.
I don't know, man. If you need a keyboard, I'll buy you one, I guess. We'll
donate a keyboard. We'll donate a keyboard to the UW Oshkosh department for you letting us use everything.
And I guarantee you that keyboard is still there in that road case, sitting in that cupboard probably, or in that, like it's...
Yeah.
There was some basses and stuff that, there's parts, I've had parts of instruments, that have been fun. There was, at the time when I was there, the bass room was just like a graveyard of instruments that had not seen love in a really long time.
Yeah.
There was the cello room was kind of like that too. There was parts and fronts of things and bows that were maybe good, but you didn't know.
Yeah. I think they've been doing a good job of kind of clearing things out and just doing some general house cleaning and stuff. I thought I don't know if they had just like a rummage sale of things that they used to have there.
Well, I'm excited because did you see they're supposed to, we had heard since we were in school that they were going to expand the studio and build new part of, I don't know if they were going to connect Halsey or they had something, but supposedly that's supposed to happen in the next couple of years now.
Okay.
I mean, that's been like 15, 20 years in the making.
I know. Yeah.
But, and I really, and much love to, we wouldn't be here setting this stuff up and even doing any recording at all if it wasn't for Wally Messner. Is like Marlo, Marlo is a really awesome engineer and a really awesome videographer and has always been on the cutting edge of kind of what's going on. It's kind of cool how you've incorporated all this into your business, and also like it's just, as I tell my students and stuff, once you get into this, it's very addictive to, like, I like gear. I like playing with it. I like trying to make stuff with it. And it's a different kind of way of painting in a way.
It is.
Like you can do a lot of different things with it. And Wally Messner, our recording professor, I mean, literally that guy is legendary in the business. And I feel so honored and lucky that, again, people are like, oh, UWO, whatever. I mean, the school's the third largest school in the state, and and especially they pumped a lot of money into it recently, but we were lucky there to have, it was kind of cool at that time because we were still, from the late 90s, early 2000s were still using just the tiny little studio, and we were basically in an old converted closet. And but we had, and stuff was always breaking down. And I always tell my students that they don't know how easy it is now too. Like, imagine trying to use Pro Tools when we first learned, like we were still cutting tape and doing all that. I wish, honestly, I had access to more of that stuff, but.
That's one thing I loved about, Wally's program is that he knew the direction that the industry was heading towards. But he still wanted us to know what it was like, how recording it began in its original art form.
Well, and those guys
reel-to-reel stuff, and
they're
you said,
brilliant.
cutting
like
tape.
You watch those guys, like Wally could do like Tom Dowd, who's an idol of mine. Tom Dowd worked on the Manhattan Project, so he worked on the atomic bomb, and then he worked for Atlantic as a recording engineer, and so he worked for Ahmet Ertegun. We worked for the Ertegun brothers. When they had, everyone from Ray Charles and Charles Mingus and Aretha Franklin and all the way through, and all the Stax record stuff got produced through them too. But Tom Dowd there's an excellent documentary called Tom Dowd on the Language of Music, where he talks about it. He's the guy on Layla, who mixed that song. He's done just everything. But Tom, when he mixes, they have a video in there where he pulls up the Layla part where, like in the Good Philistine, the breakdown, when the piano breakdown happens, and he's bringing up tracks that you don't hear in the recording, and he's just going back and listening to the master tape, and first time in like 40 years, and he uses all 10 fingers at one time. And Wally used to do that too, and I've never developed that skill because I never have a board to work on like that, but those guys can think like, I've got the drum kit under my hand, and they're wiggling different fingers and playing it like a instrument to get the levels. And Wally would close his eyes and he would do such amazing things. I was always into weird weights, so many different kinds of music. But one day when Questlove was when the roots weren't even huge yet, I was like, how does he get that sound? How do you make a drum kit sound like an electronic drum kit? And he's like, I'm not sure. Let's try. And within 1 hour of class, Wally had figured out how to dial in that snare tone and
plugging in different channels.
Well, and I'm glad I know that too. Is signal flow. That's the hardest thing we learn. Like with computers now, you can do so much cool stuff, and you can have these amazing. I use all the Universal Audio stuff now, so their plugins are incredible, and they already have their own separate converter that's running it outside of your computer, so it processes faster. And that's I have a bunch of the outboard. I have the harmonizer.
Really?
I have all the outboard. I went and bought the outboard gear that I'd used at UWO.
Sweet.
But I have the digital version. And people who listen, if you know me, I love all kinds of old school stuff, new school stuff, whatever. And I really like innovators. So I'm really into old school recording technology, and ever since the Germans were doing it on a piece of wire, I found it interesting. I've got Edison reels at home and everything else, but people talk about how, now you're all using computers, and it's this, that. Well, computers have caught up, man. You can't tell the difference. Some of the modeling software on some of the amplifiers and stuff, you will never know the difference, especially if I have an Ampeg plug-in and I'm playing bass. I can hide that enough that you won't know what I'm playing through. The only problem with some of the guitar ones, Marshall's got some good ones, Fender's got some good ones, is it doesn't break up the same way. It doesn't have the same crunch. But learning that signal flow from Wally of this goes to this, goes to this, goes to this, is very helpful when you're working in a DAW, a digital audio workstation, because you can't see that. Mm-hmm. You can click buttons that connect those things together. Mm-hmm. But if you don't know too, or if you're stacking plugins, you got to know, what should I put? Where should the reverb go?
What order?
What order should it? And then, and then again, there is no. The other thing is that Wally really taught us too is there's no right answer. Mm-hmm. So that's the beautiful thing about recording as an art form itself. Unto just a lot of musicians have no idea how to record. You can be a brilliant musician and have no recording chops, which that's why people go in the studio and get recorded. But for some of us, Marlo and I have always been fascinated by the gear stuff too, where it's I want to know how to record it too, and what are the nuances of, if I move this microphone 4 feet back, why does it sound completely different, or why is this microphone related to that one differently? So I think a lot of musicians need to embrace that nowadays too, because we learn so much. I feel our time and not to diss any school system or anything now, but it was really an amazing time at that time that we were in school, because everyone from on the scene, you had everyone from Janet Planet and John Harmon and Tom Washatka and Tom Thiebaud and all that crew, down to the guys who were slightly older than us, like Andy Mertens and those guys, and in the arrangement fellas, some of my first. I'll tell you a story. Back when this was the Globe,
Yeah, okay.
And I came down here and it was the Globe. I was underage and I could barely play bass.
Yeah.
But they'd serve me beer because I always looked bigger than everyone else. And so I was like 19 and I came down here and Mertens and I just got to be friends. So he must have been in his mid-20s and he was like, and he'd let me sit in sometimes and stuff and I'd come down and watch. And it was when the big booths were in here. They had those huge booths up front.
Yep.
So I drank like 3 dark beers and then I threw up in that front booth over there somewhere where while they were playing and no one noticed. It was amazing because the booths were so high. So that's a good collegiate story. I was down here listening to jazz. I'm a huge dude who really doesn't like to drink that much, but I'm trying to fit in to.
What other secrets you got for us today?
Oh, I don't mind sharing this stuff now. I mean, what's the statute of limitations on most of this is well over. Like if we want to go back to my teenage years, it's even going to get worse.
Yeah.
But then but at that time there was so many of us playing. There was so many of us out on the scene trying to play music, and then there was jazz stuff going on, and there was cool rock bands, and there was even some really awesome metal bands that were playing that were a little older than us. And then we I remember when Peyton McDonald, who was a beloved professor of ours and slightly older than me, just barely by a few years, Peyton was our percussion professor, and he came in, and I got to be I remember Dr. Grind was like, "Hey, Kurt, could you go talk to you want to interview the the new percussion guy and see what you think of him? And I was like, sure. So I got to do like a student interview.
Yeah.
I felt all snooty, and I mean, I'd been there like long enough to be a professor, I guess, so whatever. But I got to sit down with Peyton, and he and I hit it off, and Peyton had, come to school from, he'd already had his doctorate like in his, before he was 27, I think,
he just didn't stop going to school.
Yeah, he never stopped going to school and was really into world music and avant percussion and Terry Riley and, and all these weird composers he turned us on to. And he revolutionized, like we had that John Cage festival.
Yeah.
Like you guys were playing, people were playing Cactuses. I was wearing a mask and screaming stuff in the hallways, and there was people doing poetry. It was awesome, man.
Some of us students were losing it during the middle of the pieces because we didn't know how to react.
Yeah, how do you react to mic'd up Cactuses and like?
Because when Doc was up there like performing, like it was an art, but there were some like sporadic random things that were coming out of his mouth or things that he was banging, like if it was like a glass or something, like that's not even extreme enough to describe some of the things that have to be used as instruments, but you get the point, so.
I just find that to me has always been, I've got a love-love relationship with the knowledge of music. So to me also that's where I think Peyton and I and a lot of us share that of like, people don't understand how awesome, like I am a music historian in my own way. Even before I could read, sure. I was really into like listening to music and collecting records and going back to the beginning of time. I think that really, like, that's what you can get from world music too, is to understand, like, it's really fascinating, say like the pentatonic scale, like the 5-note major pentatonic scale. If you play it from the bottom up, you can jam and sound like you're playing like an Irishy jig, like that kind of stuff. But if you play it backwards, you get this much more Asian influence. It's the same scale, but how those 5 notes are approached, thousands and thousands of miles apart by cultures separated from all different types of things. And that's, I think, Peyton really turned us on to, because he restarted the steel drum band that once had been at UWO.
I was going to say that, Peyton brought a lot of different things, just out of his studio. Like he changed the way that the jazz program was, right? With the drummers and percussionists that were involved there. And just like you said, like the whole world music thing, and just really having an emphasis on just exploring everything. And
nothing against, music education for me, but I've been teaching outside of music education for over 27 years, and I have no degree in music education at all. And I've come around things the hard way, but some things I've sent a lot of kids off to do some really amazing things with the knowledge that I didn't have from what I felt was lacking in my personal education. I sang at a young age and won my high school choir award and played in like a bunch of punk and funk bands and stuff on bass and guitar, could barely read. I'd played clarinet when I was younger. So I should have went to school for voice, but I knew I wouldn't learn the theory. So that's why I forced myself to go for bass, because singing's easy. Like, to me, if I hear it, I can sing it. And I would cheat. I know I would cheat if I didn't. And so I made it personally hard for myself to try to figure that out. But a lot of the people teaching at schools it's nothing against them, but it's very good to learn classical music and how it works. But also, we're running into a problem now again where, too, like, I don't know sometimes if I tell someone to go to school for classical violin or something, if they should, because those jobs are very few and far between. And as a musician, you need to be a little bit more well-rounded, because, there's people who've been playing violin since they're 4 years old, or piano or something, and they're phenomenal. But you take the sheet music away and they can't play. And then you've got people coming from the other rock side of things who say, like, which is where I came from originally, but people are like, well, I don't want to learn to read, it'll take away my creativity. No, that's baloney. My whole theory is always like, say music is a country, like, and you're like, man, I love that country. Like, I love the weather and the architecture and the food and everything. Like, and the people are beautiful, and the style and everything I like is exactly how I like it. And I want to live there the rest of my life, but I refuse to speak the language. Like, why? And just because you learn one style of music language, that's the other thing they're like, well, you'll shut yourself out of all these other things. No, I feel it gives you a starting point, because then you can explain what you're doing.
Yeah.
Like, and that's not to say that, but sometimes people think, oh, I did this chord and this chord, I made this up. You didn't make up a chord. I can explain whatever you played, and that's the knowledge of knowing music theory. But at the same time, too, say an art form like jazz. Jazz is supposed to be learned on the streets, but a lot of collegiate jazz stuff is taught as memorization of tunes and things like that. To me, that's like, again, Miles Davis got into Juilliard, but then he didn't go to Juilliard. He wanted to go find out where Charlie Parker was playing on the streets.
Yeah.
And and I think having those two kinds of combinations together are super important to our musical, just being if you want to be a lifelong musician and always keep playing, you got to have big ears. And I always say, don't be music racist too. Never say, I don't like country, or I don't like rap, or I don't like metal.
Sure.
There's always something that you can, and there's no way you can classify an entire blanket, thing, and there's always something you can pull from it. Even that's what recording has also taught me. There's a lot of music I respect the recording of, but don't particularly like the music taste-wise, but I'm like, whoa, I can find something in that I find very, or like a pop, I'm not a huge pop guy, but it's huge, when you hear a well-produced or well-written pop song, kudos to them. It's not easy to write a hook that everyone's going to be humming the rest of their lives and stuff like that. So getting into the steel drum band stuff, it's just like having that outlet, because I got to play bass in the steel drum band. Peyton came in, taught all you guys all the pans, and then from there, and Marlo and I have always been very entrepreneurial too, and don't like to work a regular job kind of thing. And so, getting the steel drum band as a real band, and and getting out playing for as many years as that went on for, and all that is awesome.
Fratello's was our stomping ground here in town. Like, we played there. I don't even remember our schedule, but
it's like a lot.
We probably played there at least once a week.
Yeah, and then the summers
it got to be like that when we first started off, right?
Yeah, it was. Oh, and once it picked up, and then I think people realized like how well, and everyone was so young and had all we got to do is play music and party, and we're getting paid pretty decent to like. Yeah. Especially when you played it, once it started growing, and like you could play some bigger resorts or weddings or corporate events.
Which is what it led to, I remember on the episode, I think it was with Danny Drabic. Shout out to Danny. We were talking about like people being performers and stuff like that, and I was bringing back the memory of one of our first performances that we had over at Fratello's. We're sitting there behind the steel pans, and like we're playing all this like super happy music, but we didn't look like the part. So then our friends came up and like, man, you guys sound awesome, but you guys look miserable.
Oh, and that's a big thing too. Is I'm really into the history of vaudeville, professional wrestling, music, anything that I'm fascinated with. That's why I'm friends with Burt, is I find those things very, I think there's something that goes back to like ancient times, from like Greeks, and just people have always been storytelling and performing for each other. And I've always told I'm really animated and stuff like that. I think when you get on stage, I always say it's only so fun to watch four guys in t-shirts staring at the ground. For a while. Like, eventually you got to sell it with your body, and you should, once you start feeling the music, you don't have to be a super outspoken person. Maybe your stage presence is more minimal. Like, I knew a keyboard player, I always tell the students, he was really shy, so he'd stand on stage, and he would be deadpan, and he played in a rock band and stood up, but he'd be deadpan until he had to play. And then he would be like, and then he would stand there at attention. So, but it was something visually, again, it's like magic, like a magic trick. You just watch the hand and you're like, whatever. But the steel drum band was great for that, because everyone was doing, dancing.
We had some little choreographed steps in the hard times, which is only just a side-to-side thing, but it was still something.
Hey, it's something. It's something that feels, and when you start feeling that band, that was a thing too, where it's very hard. People don't realize just, like we were talking before we let the cameras roll, like bands are like, it's like it's a weird relationship / business agreement / but everyone's wearing their heart on their sleeve sometimes, and that goes through music in a lot of ways, and I think it's something that unfortunately turns a lot of people off to music, so that's why it's important. And Marlo and I have always been kind of positive guys, so Marlo and I never really have a problem. If something happens between us, we're like, we just kind of move on from it. Like, there's never been I'm more about fixing the problem than
Yeah.
wondering who did it or why. Like, can we just figure it out and move on? And he and I have always been that way in any project or anything I try to do. If it's not fun, why are we doing it? Has always been my.
Well, that's been the question for Pandora's Group for the last 5 years, I'm guessing.
Yeah. Well, and I'm always down to play. That's the thing, too, is like, I think with a lot of bands, it's like that. And you really got to love it because, especially people, I don't think folks realize, especially this year, how hard it has been for those in the performing arts and education and other things. But what also I feel, I'm not saying this diss-wise at all, but like I've got this entrepreneurial hunger, and I know like you kind of do too. In some, and anyone who wants to create something that without anyone telling you what to do, like whether it be a restaurant or a album or whatever, you got to somehow whip your own butt into shape to want it more than anyone else to create that. Because when I was in school, I got lucky. I started working with my buddy Jason Verhagen, who's now passed on, unfortunately. But when I was working at Appleton Exclusive, I started working on Fever Pitch Magazine when I was still in college. And that taught me, like, I was getting interviews with David Cross and Bruce Campbell and all these idols that I really, and getting sent all this free music in the mail before the internet was amazing to review and stuff like that. But getting your deep ears and open up your eyes to trying to do something artistically that you want to for you is really hard. But a lot of folks, when things dry up, like I always tell musicians, the hard part is you can't be, if you're like, there's no gigs, you got to find something else. That's why I say teaching is, every musician should teach as well as play, because you can explain it and then you get it and you're getting paid to practice.
You grow so much from those experiences, you know what I mean? And, there's something to be said too about this pandemic, like you said, like you have that desire, that passion, that hunger just to keep something going. And I think that's what a lot of teachers have done. And I reached out to Nate Edwards, who's now the professor.
Who's a colleague of ours in school.
Or, one of Wally's kids. And I asked him, like, hey, do you have a connection over at the university, like who's teaching, classical guitar over there? And he hooked me up with Neil.
I can't remember his last name either. I know.
Daniels?
Is it Daniels?
Sorry, Neil. If you ever listen to this. Well, we're going to make sure we
get
it right.
So you're taking classical guitar lessons?
Yeah, I just started on Monday.
Oh.
And he kind of gave me the whole spiel.
So how's your Villalobos? You got it?
Yeah, I'm solid. I'm ready to perform at the next
and for you,
convo.
Like, what's it been like for you with a family man with 3 kids and a business?
Neil Davis.
Yep, there you go.
Shout out to Neil Davis.
He was right the first time, so kudos to Neil and to Marlo. But with you, like, me, I've devoted my whole life to playing. This is what I don't know. When I was in 6th grade, I had to write down what I wanted to do for a living, and it was musician, comedian, or guy who does cartoon voices. And that's like, I ain't changed. I like dogs, I like music, I like bikes, I like learning. You have now a family which takes up your time. You got 3 wonderful kids and a beautiful wife in this business. Is it? And you're still trying to find time to work in artistic things for yourself like that. Yeah. What's it been like for you being, because Marlo plays percussion and piano and violin and a multitude of other instruments that it's hard to carve out that kind of time in your day? Like,
well, big thing, which I've learned over time, and even when I first, studied violin with, Mr. Goodwin, like he had, schedules and everything, and checklists and all that kind of stuff. And at the time when you were like 7 or 8, you're like, what is this stuff?
It's so annoying.
I mean? And now you're like, wow, I live off a schedule. I live off of checklists. I live off being able to write things down to see what needs to be done, what goals I want to achieve, and all that kind of stuff. And it feels good when you cross it off, or it's a nice friendly reminder where you don't see something crossed off. You know what I mean?
Like, I think people too like to see the list end, but to me, it's like the list never ends. It just keeps growing on itself in a different way. So you have to and prioritizing things too. Like,
basically, yes. That's what it comes down to.
Whatever you want to get good at. Something I'm really about is like personal. I'm somewhat of a weird monkish Renaissance man. So like, I like martial arts and I like working out, and I also like reading philosophy and poetry and making music. And I think there's something that goes back, cooking my own meals. Like, I think there's something that goes back you know, like we live in such a fast-paced, crazy world now that the pandemic has been good for me in a way, where especially being as social as I am, to like kind of go a little bit inward and think, you know, what are the things that are important to you? What are the things that you know, you got to say that at least the pandemic has shown us a lot of things we wasted time on.
Sure.
You know, that maybe could be done more efficiently or were superfluous or, you know, like, so to me, finding myself getting back into recording and music and having a little more time to like teaching online now out of my house rather than in a school has been good and bad. I miss my students in person, but I've also been able to grow the program to now we're using Ableton Live in almost every lesson, and I'm on the Ableton education team using the recording stuff that I learned years ago. And no offense against Pro Tools, but I ain't opened my Pro Tools account in like 6 months since I've been rocking Ableton, just because I love Pro Tools, but there's so many interesting things that Ableton can do. And now the functionality of getting these clip-based recordings and getting kids to create on their own, like they don't understand how easy they have it when I say you could spend, if you have a okay computer, and a demo version of a program and a couple $100 in gear, you can make professional recordings in your basement. You know, and we would have to dream about how much, you know, like, well, someday I'm gonna have to buy this, and like a studio would cost you $1 bazillion. And also it's really sad to see that happening with the big studios now, where the guys who actually have the gear and have put all this time into collecting it, I mean, those studios are still very much worth going to, because you're not going to find those those pieces of gear. You go pay for that gear in those years to be able to do that stuff. But I think it's important to support those guys, but also the creativity at home is, like you said, with checklists and stuff. It's a lot easier if you can start composing on your own and bring your stuff to your band, if you can record the parts and have a better idea of, hey, guys, you know, maybe you don't have to play that. Maybe you do. I want you to play that. Or I want you to play a simile of this. And then it's so much easier to pass ideas around. And I think that's the beauty of the modern stuff, of being able to send a track, you know, like, hey, I'm going to mix down just a stereo version of this. Can you add violin to this and send it back to me this weekend? Yeah. And that's insane.
That's pretty cool.
You know, like, and as long as you know the guy at home can record it decent, then you're fine. You know?
That's what I was trying to get at, too, with, you know, starting to take lessons with Neil. Like, he was teaching, you know, virtually basically the whole last year. Because he's based out of Milwaukee, and we were he was trying to explain why it'd be better and in our best interest is to meet virtually, just because he's nailed the system down and he's had he's got really great success from it, you know. And in order for us to meet in person on Wednesday when he's up in Oshkosh, you know, 1 day a week during the school year, it would be kind of tough. And then I'd have to sign up through the university and do all that kind of blah, blah, blah.
I totally,
you know what I mean?
I totally get that. And people think you can't. Here's what I like about online lessons. Because you can't play in time with each other yet, which is coming soon. There's people working on it now. You can sort of jam in real time 500 miles apart if you have the right equipment, but we're not there yet. But that's coming soon. But when you teach virtually, the person is sitting there. They can't move. They can't go anywhere. Yeah. They can't chit-chat with you. You can chit-chat about other things, but I do a lot of show and the teachers need to learn, like, games, like show and tell and call and response, because often if I'm like, here, play this back to me, or like if you're trying to get someone to get the phrasing or something, if I play it for them a couple times and then have them call and response me and it becomes the routine, and you have the right audio equipment, like, you know, I'm coming through my entire recording gear at home with, you know, an SM57 or not SM57, with a 7B, you know, like broadcast mic and stuff. So it sounds really good from my end. And now we know there is tweaks too. If people don't realize, if you're having problems in Zoom meetings, do some searching. You can tweak the audio to help you, depending on, like, because it has, you know, like an auto compressor on it that will, so if you have a soft talker, it gets really hard to, they got to test their levels and stuff. But these kids too, like, kids are so smart with the audio stuff. Once you get them going, they're finding out things about programs and things that I didn't know, and then feeding it back to me, or here's a shortcut that I learned. It's
like how we were for our parents back then.
It's like, well, and it's kind of cool, because I feel like our generation too is I don't know, I love and hate it. I kind of feel like wish I was born either 100 years earlier than my time I was born or 100 years later, because you're stuck in this weird, like, I remember the time before time. Like, and but at the same time, you're like, guys like us, like, we had friends too who maybe weren't that computer literate when they graduated from high school and maybe didn't go into a career where they use a lot of computers. So computer learning for them was not the easiest. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Like, I still remember even at UWO having to go like to the computer lab to print and stuff sometimes when you're on campus. You had to go get in the lab. So some people didn't have the equipment at home or couldn't do. And that's the thing I really think it's important with getting that broadband to everyone. I teach my vet, love him. He's a very good friend of mine, and he lives out in the country, but he can see where the internet is, like a mile down the road, but
really?
He doesn't have it. Oh my God.
Yeah,
And he's like, it's so frustrating. He's like, how about I just take a loan out and build it? You pay me back because I can see where the internet ends.
We have some friends that live out in like Black Wolf, and they're also not too far away from like the next like telephone pole line, you know, but it's like costs something like, I don't know, $80,000 or something to get it out there. And
if they're like, well, there's only 3 houses over there, why are we going to go that far? You know what I mean?
Yep. There's always an excuse or something, but I don't know. It's a different world.
I feel you, homie. I feel you.
But yeah, I mean, Reginald was hybrid when we were doing the Yamaha School of Music up at Hyde, which is pretty cool. So it was every other week. They would change because it was a parent-student type of class, you know, to begin with.
Oh, 2-on-1 at a
So
time.
they had to limit the room capacity at the beginning, and then eventually that, you know,
how's he doing? Away. How's teaching? How are the kids doing musically?
They're great, man. Like, they're super into it. And then when I started just on Monday when I was starting to play the guitar, I have like a really mini, like it's like a ukulele, but a guitar.
Like a parlor style, really small guy? Yeah,
so
cool.
It's all nylon strings, so it's easy on their fingers and stuff. And they just strum away and then do whatever. I'm just showing them like the little finger patterns and stuff that the Pima, that Neil was showing me, like the 1 2 1 2 1 2 and 1 2 3 1 2 3. Yeah. So.
It's very important to remember too with when learning music. I think people don't realize this. A lot of people give up because it's like because you buy an instrument. Isn't going to make you learn that instrument. And I find a lot of people who are very successful in, like, say, overachieving students who have excellent grades and things like that, or people who are very successful adults who then try to pick up a musical instrument, they hit a wall because it doesn't matter how smart you are or whatever, because people don't realize that music is also a sport and martial art because you are using muscles that, like,
oh my gosh.
Like I always say, sports are big muscles, I tell the kids. Like you're using arms, you're using legs. With music, we're using very delicate, very strong, you know, tiny related muscles, which people don't realize how long it takes to do that. You spend more time, you're not best off learning your favorite song. So like if everyone wants, teach me this. Well, then you're going to be like a trained monkey who can play that song. Yeah. Your best bet is to sit down and play A, this is A. Until you know that it's A. Yep. Then you just add another one. And it's not that hard because, you know, again, in Western music, there's only 12 notes you can play. So like, once you understand it, but we've got kids that are really young, once they understand that concept and it becomes second nature to them. Then learning and also teaching the theory while I make them learn the theory right along with it.
Fundamentals, man, just everywhere. Well, like they can think of sports too. Like you see all the guys, like, you know, like you said, Dick, you want to learn your favorite song. Back, and you know, when like Jordan Iverson, all those guys, like when at height of basketball for us, like we wanted to always mimic them, you know, like Iverson doing his whatever moves, you know, you see all these young kids trying to mimic and do that same thing. Like,
or you're trying to do these crazy ball handling skills that you have no business doing. Like I'm going behind my back and no, you're not.
No,
you just are like you look like a clown trying to.
You don't need to do that in order to be a good basketball player. And just like you know.
Well, like another thing is roles too. I think that as people mature, some people don't always do this, but as people mature, especially me as a musician, and that's the other thing that kind of breeds something I don't like about traditional music education is competition, because you have to be competitive. Yeah. But at the same time, for me, again, like if you want to be first chair violin, you know, in like a world-class orchestra, yes, you're going to have to get to the point of you can just shred whatever. But to me, most of the music I play and most of the things I'm into is about reinterpreting other things or being able to play whatever I see, but making it my own and finding your own. As Miles Davis said, you should hear any etude you've ever played and everything you ever listened to and every experience you ever had should go into a funnel, and then what comes out is what you sound like. So everyone gets so caught up in, like, when you were saying, like, again, like the classical guitar fingerings and stuff like that, where you see a guy going like this and you're so impressed sometimes, you need to realize that, watch his left hand. He might not be moving that much, but his right hand is doing a very calculated, repetitive motion that isn't changing. So it's not as hard as you think, but what you have to do is sit there and learn till your fingers can do it without you even thinking about it. And that's what's funny is I'll be teaching sometimes, especially in person, where I'll be playing an instrument, reading the wrong clef. So like I'll be playing cello, teaching viola, while the kid's reading alto clef, coaching them, reading the wrong clef, singing along, and thinking about a sandwich. And then I was like, and that's why music is like, people don't realize the superpower of how it rewires your brain. And that's why it's so important to get young kids into it, because problem solving in the future or just complex systems, you're able to kind of, you know.
Jeff Meyer, shout out to Jeff Meyer, the conductor over at the university. I remember showing up to a rehearsal and I did not practice my part, right? And it was a super complicated section, right? And he's up there, you know, conducting, everyone's playing and doing their thing, and then he looks immediately over at me while he's still conducting and cueing people left and right, like, you know, right on cue, right? It's like, Marlo, when are you gonna practice your part? You know, we've talked about this, you know, like, you know, in front of everyone. I'm just like,
oh yeah,
you
get called out on that.
But that just kind of goes to show, like, the training of the mind and what you're able to do, and your muscle memory and
we'll talk about
brain memory and
well, I always felt bad for Jun Wong, because when Jun
right?
we had an amazing orchestra. I mean, we didn't really deserve him. Like Jun Wong was an amazing Chinese conductor and violinist. The guy literally like grew up poor in China and then like carved some flute and then learned to play the flute and then went to one of those awesome opera schools like Jackie Chan went to and learned to play violin at a young age. And then he was like a violin virtuoso, and then he gave it all up to conduct. And then in Oshkosh, and then he became, you know, he's a world-class conductor, and he took a lot of crap from the university. I don't know if this happened when you were there.
He was there, yeah.
No, but because he used to be harder on the students.
Yeah.
And then he would, you know, like half the students in there weren't doing anything, you know? And so he's used to laying down the law to get them to work. And then the university even complained and said, like, you can't be that hard out of them. Some aren't even music majors and whatever. And I felt really bad for him because his, you know, he spoke English well, but, you know, in a more limited sense. But his musical knowledge was so high. So he's trying to talk to all these dumb Midwestern kids and teach them all this amazing stuff. But something that always stuck with me is he said, we must honor the composer's wishes and play what is ever on the page. And so, like, you know, it's like, he wrote this, you play what's there. Try to interpret the information. And that's really important, is because when you start writing your own stuff or playing in a band, there's nothing more annoying than like the dude who doesn't have the stuff done. Or like, dude, like, we're all ready. Why aren't you? And that's the other thing musically that people don't get is sometimes I would say people keep playing with the same people, say kids growing up or something, or even if you're in a dad band or something like that. Sometimes, unfortunately, I mean, I can play at every level. I can play with a little kid. I can play with a super advanced player. I can play whatever instrument. I'm super comfortable. I don't care if you're 3. There's something we can do, you know. I can get you doing something. I can do something else. But a lot of people get a very, a chip on their shoulder about how good they are, or if they fit in right, or this guy can do this and I can't. Well, maybe that's not your thing. You know, like a basketball team, it's a great example is, like in that the Last Dance documentary, like Jordan was a ball hog for a long time and loved getting fed the ball, but then he realized, like, oh,
I can't do this by myself.
To win, I'm better sharing the ball and being a coach and a leader. So that's what I always try to show people is once you understand it, my students, I always make them teach the younger guys because you don't know it. Because then people hold the knowledge too. I hate it when people do that. Like they can do something that you can't do and don't want to tell you. Yeah. Well, somebody taught you, dude. Yeah. So, like, why are you going to hide that knowledge? Why not share it? And then maybe that person will kick you back to something else. And that's the thing musically for me is like, I always tell the students on their first lesson, I'm like, you're in this cool new club. I'm like, this goes back to the first people beating on logs and plucking, the insides of animals and singing together and stuff. And there's something very, like, I try to get that, people don't dance as much as they should. People don't sing as much as they should. But most tribal cultures had no idea that there was any other way.
Yeah.
There's a great book called This Is Your Brain on Music, written by Dr. Daniel Levitin, that is talks about all the functionality of the brain. And Dr. Levitin was a session musician and recording engineer for years. And then, like, in his late 30s, he started being fascinated about, like, why is your favorite song my least favorite song? Why does music give you goosebumps? Like, all these questions, and wanted to know neurophysically why. So he went back to school for neurology and then wrote this incredible book. But he talks about how it wasn't until recorded music, and this is where recording kind of sucks, where I say I wish I was born in the future of the past. Recorded music, people don't realize, has only been around about 100 years. Like, ish. So, in that people were actually buying it in their houses, even, you had to have the equipment and you had to buy records, and, like, not everyone had that right away. So, radio was big too, but sheet music was huge before that. Like, almost everyone in a family played something. You didn't have to play great, but what did you do before it got dark out? People would sit around and jam and sing songs, and you see that in, like, the older generations too of families where people still like
Filipino families.
Yeah, Filipino families. No, but that's because
karaoke.
Yes, but there's tradition in there of, like, and that's the thing is the two, like, say Filipino families. Like, I always consider myself an American mutt proudly. That's what I am. Like, you can call me whatever you want, and people can get hung up on I'm Irish, I'm this. I love pit bulls. When I say pit bull, a pit bull can look like a dog this big with a weird shaped head, or a giant dog with, like. I'm an American mutt. That's who I am. But there's a lot of people who've like the closest relative I can trace to Europe is my great grandparents from Sweden. We're both from Sweden. So I had some Swedish culture, like, learn some of the Christmas traditions and things like that, or a couple of the dishes, that, like, my aunt could still make that, like, my family learned to make. But, like, where Marlo has built Manila here in Oshkosh as, like, how many Filipino people did I know growing up? Not many. How many Filipino, and I met Marlo and I've always been fascinated with the culture, but then to take this, which generationally, your parents being first generation, here, and then you being firstborn generation here is such an interesting story to me. And I've always loved your knowledge of your family over there and how that ties in here. And you're always big on trying to, like, really expose the community to the culture in a different way, and maybe show them other sides of things that they hadn't realized. And that's, like, you ask most people, where are the Philippines? Maybe they can sort of point on a map, right. Or, like, and then what is a Filipino person, or what is like, we talk about this sometimes, but I'm fascinated with the history of the Philippines is
it runs deep.
It's been there, and, like, why, and it's such a, I always tell my students too, like, when you look at, say, a Jamaican person, people don't realize, like, that is not a native Jamaican. Like, the native Jamaicans are no longer there.
Yep.
You know what I mean? That is an African transplanted person to those islands. The Philippines and a lot of island countries like that, like where the Philippines were never, the native natives were never wiped out or anything like that, but often, which is thank God, but often taken over by other cultures and then that it was absorbed, parts were absorbed and parts were fought and it's such a deep and very, it's almost like some of the Middle Eastern countries where, like, sure. Afghanistan has been like, who's kicking our butt now, like, and telling us what to do, and I've always thought that's really cool, especially with, like, the badass Filipino martial arts and all that came from, like, I love martial arts because all that stuff came from farmers and stuff, dude. That's just how to defend yourself. Basically,
there's some, like, pretty lethal types of different martial arts.
Yeah.
I don't know what the proper name of it is, but they use a bala song, like the butterfly knife. Mm-hmm. Like there's a strict, discipline just based around that.
The bala song, and then it's not a screamer, right? Is it a screamer?
Screamer, yeah.
The
screamer,
bamboo. Yeah, that's the short staff bamboo stuff, and but all those are related.
Yeah.
So where you learn the stick fighting, and then that moves into knife fighting, and then you can teach a guy to, and that's why again, we always talk about like a guy like Manny Pacquiao, what a hero to when you have those kind of people culturally that pop up to these whatever culturally looked at more obscure countries.
Yeah.
It's really amazing to see those kind of. Yeah. And what a hero he is back home.
Yep.
It's to the Filipino people just in general.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I love those kind of things because I feel that, what term you don't hear about America anymore? Melting pot.
Oh, sure.
Remember when we were growing up and it was all America is the melting pot and this? Now it seems like we're getting a TV dinner and everyone's trying to put everyone in little.
It almost seems like it's one or two, it's two different sides, man.
Right, and I'm all about that, like the multicultural. I am such a sponge for culture that I feel like not that I don't have my own. I just have I'm absorbing everything that I got fascinated about sumo wrestling, so I had to learn everything about sumo wrestling because sumo is the most ancient, most traditional form of Japanese fighting that there is. And when you learn about what those guys can do, it's fascinating. So those kind of traditional things, I think in this country we're missing a little bit, or we're holding on to the wrong things when we should, again, good music is always blending other music. Like, we would never have the music we had today if it weren't for the terrible things that happened that led us to smashing these things together that you shouldn't maybe belong, but all of a sudden something new and creative and amazing comes out of it. And big ups to Kenny Hoopla. I don't know if anyone's hip to Kenny Hoopla, but Kenny's a local Oshkosh kid who, Oshkosh North graduate, who is blowing up now. He's doing Lollapalooza. He's doing Riot Fest. He's doing all kinds of really cool videos and stuff. He started in town here making his own music videos, making his own music, went to Milwaukee and really blew up. And now he's, nationally recognized. And Kenny, if anyone listens to his music, he has somehow combined pop punk, rap, and pop and danceable music in a new way. When I first heard some of his tunes, it gave me chills. It was like he did something new. He did something new. He's singing, but he's not. It's what I mean. It's like, and if I can't see him guesting on like a bazillion people's records singing hooks in the near future, like he's got such a great voice and look, and he means what he says, and that's the other thing too. Is I think artistically and everything, we need to have some kind of, let's make everything have meaning again. You know what I mean? Like, and not in a exclusionary way, more of a inclusionary way. Let's share the knowledge. Let's share the things that we can help to make the other people better. I think if that's like in a band, if you're the one guy and you've got a band around, and you're Mr. Shredsville, to me, I'd rather have a band of like everyone working, and those moments are magic. That's something you can't explain. No, there's nothing like it. Other human experience that you can have like that.
Like our steel drum band, at its height, when we had so many people involved, like that sound can never be beat.
And then even when we could jam then too, because then all of a sudden you could break it down, and people, if everyone's head's in the game, just like basketball, if there's one dude who's not paying attention or not, maybe, and again, you don't have like a Rodman, like we were just talking about some of these old guys, like Rodman realized I don't care if I shoot. I'm just going to be the best rebounder in the history of basketball.
Yeah, you want me to defend who? I got him.
Yeah, I got him. And then make that your specialty, and all of a sudden you're in a whole class that no one else has. So that's the other thing, too, is another, I always say that we were just talking about this, too. In music, a lot of people are jockish in a way, and especially when it comes to improv, because people want to, you watch a jazz jam one time and watch one guy get a bunch of applause, and then watch the next solo that comes after that. And it feeds, and it's beautiful because that's a thing that feeds off it too. But I think for the sake of not doing an I want to go back to, you know when you see those New Orleans bands and house parties and people are just like partying and having a good time and having a fish fry and, you know, making some music and doing that's what we're missing. You know, that sake of just making art for art and making joyous sounds together. Like people, I think if everyone sang together, like if we sang together, like even like think churches and stuff like that, even just that experience of singing in church, even if it's the same, you know, if you know the hymns inside and out and you're singing the liturgy, like that is something that is so primal in us that is fascinating to me that I think we could really bring back to. That's why when I play live, like when I play Manila, say, people are like, oh, I love playing a gig where I'm in front of 1,000 people and on stage acting a fool, but I also really enjoy restaurant gigs because you are like a fly in the wall, but you're the loudest thing in the room.
Yeah.
So I'm watching people eat. I'm trying to get a reaction out of like, hey, this lady seems to like this stuff. Can I get her to can I get everyone's toes tapping or everyone's head nodding or can I make someone laugh or like which songs always get a reaction and you find, you know, like, or if I do this trick or I play this way, people get into this and it's really funny how that breaks down because that's part of like you don't learn entertainment. No one teaches you how to do this, how to get there's so many things that need to be taught in the arts and that's why I'm like glad I teach the way I do because they don't teach you in all the classes we had about music business and anything. We were learning to balance like ledgers for big businesses. Yeah. You don't need to know how to do that. You need to know how to, there needs to be a different kind of math for artists and stuff to personal finance in an entrepreneurial way and how to do that because those are the skills we're desperately lacking, you know, in those kind of, or how to sell yourself. Nobody ever tells you how to, here, now you can play all these instruments and do this. How do you get a gig and keep that gig? And present yourself to the, you know, like, and
it's competitive.
It's competitive, and it doesn't need to be. Where I'm more about sharing the wealth. I want to see. I think the cream of the crop rises to the top, and like that's the other thing too is like people get chips on their shoulder. If you want to let your work speak for itself, and no matter what you do, like is very important to me. Like if I'm gonna leave it like great, and I'm keep it's kind of cool going down memory lane here, but. I had to pretty much teach myself bass because I didn't have really any teachers. And then I had David Cowley, who was at Oshkosh, who was great if you already knew how to play. But he was a cellist who didn't play bass very much. But now Dr. Cowley's bigger than me, you know, 6'4", 6'6". He was a huge man and played cello and just manhandled it. Like so he played cello like nobody else's business. But Dr. Cowley is a very interesting guy. I mean, he collected Persian rugs and antique lamps and was really into different kinds of music and UFOs. And his two passions in life were... Well, he liked drawing, and he still does like drawing, but he really loved cello and fishing. So he would go up to Canada and fish every year for 3 months and not touch the cello and then come back and practice. But Cowley didn't start composing and performing his own compositions until he was in his 70s. And this stuff looked crazy. I mean, he had things where he was dropping the cello low string, another octave, and hitting stuff. And like
super cello.
Yeah, and
like super marimba, but cello form.
But he'd gone from prepared cello things and this is a guy who like you want him to shred the hardest classical pieces in the world, he'll just sit there and work on it till he gets it. Yeah. But then he started doing these original compositions kind of for himself. And what I always noticed about Cowley is, you know, he's kind of a goofy dude. I'm kind of a goofy dude. But when he would leave that stage, he wasn't mad or upset or really that jubilant or anything about how he played. He just did it. He went out and did it and then went back into I would say playing for my dogs is the same for me playing for 1,000 people. It's just a different experience. And unless you learn to play, if you're only doing it to play in front of other people, that's a good part of music and entertainment, but also you should learn to, once it becomes just who you are, I think it comes out so much more genuinely. For sure. And then those are the people that you're attracted to when you watch them perform, where you're like, I can't not watch this band. Why? You know what I mean? And I think that, and I'm always fascinated about why I like the things I like. You know, when you, why do you like an artist or a band or even a sports figure? Like, especially in basketball. I mean, yeah, you can go by stats or whatever, but people, it's a cool thing in some of the, you know, I mean, of course, we overdo this a little bit with sports sometimes about attaching the personalities, but it's really fun to find. Like, for instance, you love this story. I don't really give gold stars or awards or anything like that, okay? So my student Marcus Whitman is now one of my assistant teachers, and he's been with me since he was like 12. He's like 22, 23 now.
That's cool. Yeah.
And he's awesome. The guy's an amazing teacher and guitar player and stuff. And he's and I always have this thing where I'm a big gorilla guy who tends to be friends with short dudes. I don't know why that works out, but he's like 5'3", right? And he's not. He played baseball and football and stuff as a little scrapper guy, always that kind of dude. And but he never was really into basketball and stuff. And then between lessons, we had a cancellation, and I was like, oh, you know who Muggsy Bogues is? And he's like, I've never heard of Muggsy Bogues. And then I showed him a bunch of like highlight reels and like, and Muggsy was 5'3", led his team as the leader, called everyone sweetie, which I think is also great too, that he would call everyone on the court sweetie. But he's 5'3" and like going against dudes who are 7 feet tall sometimes. Yeah. But his advantage was his height, because if you're trying to dribble, that guy could steal a ball with his, and they always said,
coming around the screen.
Yeah, or they said the most dangerous Muggsy was when you couldn't see him because you knew he was right behind you. Yeah. Like he was going to come for the ball. Yeah. For Marcus, I gave him a guy who's not even that into basketball. He was so inspired by Muggsy. He was like, that dude's like my hero. He's like, wow. Mm-hmm. He's like, his size doesn't matter. He just goes out there and does it. Mm-hmm. So I bought him a Muggsy Bogues jersey. There you go. So my new thing is like, once you prove yourself in the School of Music and help assistant teaching, I'm going to just buy you a random 90s basketball player jersey that I think reflects you, you know.
That's a great idea, man.
Like, you're Steve Kerr.
Love it. Yeah. That's awesome.
But I think it's a good gift because it's something you can, and he's like, he thought it was really cool. He's like, dude, I almost want to hang it on the wall. And he's like, I don't know if I'd wear. He's like, wow, I'd wear this. Yeah. And I'm like, it's like a cool. That's how I work. Is weird. That's your gift. That's your diploma. Yeah. So you get a basketball jersey.
We got to wrap things up here. Battery is running low on the camera, and we've already blown through an hour, which is awesome.
That's easy. Well, thanks for having me. I'd happy to come back anytime, and I can't thank you enough for having me, and also just as. Just in case I don't do this podcast again, as lifelong old friends here, I'm just so happy to be a part of what you guys are doing here at Manila and to see it has grown and survived the pandemic and attacked all that stuff. And you've had to come up with so many different ways to survive. And now seeing like the farmers markets and the art walk open up again and live music in here again. I'm excited. Yeah. I'll put it up here. I haven't played a live gig in over a year. I'll make my first one here. So I won't play a gig until I've been purposely holding it off a little bit. But we'll get you on the books here. Yeah, my first gig will be here in Manila, and I can't say enough good things about this place. And you doing this podcast because I hope some folks are listening because this is the talks you've been having on here have been, I've been watching them and listening to them. And, cool. I'll do some stuff around the house. And then I get to hear these cool interviews and talk about the city. And it's just like, we're hanging out with whoever's on the show. Exactly. Basically what it comes down to. You're like listening in a kind of a phone call. But I think it's great. And I hope you do more. Is there anything you guys got super planned for this summer that you're doing anything now that things have started, with EAA coming again this year and all that kind of stuff. That's really the big thing that we're really going to start prepping ourselves for. Because, EAA isn't just 1 week for us and really the city. It's because there's lots of vendors and stuff that come in and all the prep time and everything. All the prep time. And from I talked to Ryan, who's one of the main people over there at EAA. And I'm like, hey, man, how are numbers looking? Because we actually got a sneak peek of the Oshkosh Food Co-op too, which is moving along. Oh, is it? Yeah. I bike by all the time. Yeah. But back to that in a second. But hey, I asked him how numbers were, and he's like, Oshkosh is going to get slammed. Because people are hungry for this? He said pre-ticket sales are up 60% from 2019. Oh my gosh, it's going to be a good year. Yeah. And I asked them, so what are you guys doing on the grounds? It's like, well, we're kind of limiting things. So it's going to be like how it was in the old days. Meaning, people are going to rush into town to try to get like an hour or two wait anywhere. Like, great. We know that we can eat. We're on the list. Yeah. It'll be great for, the businesses in town. It's going to be quite hectic. You remember how those days were back in there's just been, there hasn't been one of the big concerts or anything here in a while either. And now with Sawdust Days not happening. And it's
Yeah.
It's gonna, and I've kind of missed the planes. Like I've missed the.
I know, right?
Everyone complains about the noise pollution, but I mean, you don't get to see squadrons of World War II planes flying over your house and experimental aircraft you've never seen before. It's a pretty special week.
Yep. Yep. Well, back to you. Also, I just wanted to say thank you on behalf. I know maybe you don't hear it enough, from all your students and just being able to see, things from on the sideline of what you've been able to do, what you've been able to accomplish, and to see and hear stories of your kids like doing things and moving on, and even just to have them come back, when we do those like impromptu like jazz gigs or whatever here, it's cool because it's kind of like a nice little reunion for you with your students and your kids. I
always tell my students they start out as students and then they become lifelong friends because they've been. I've got kids that have been with me, that have master's degrees and 2 kids in their early 30s now. I never thought that would be. Yeah. Get this. Here's how long my crazy loop is. We'll get this, see if I can get this before the battery runs out. Yeah. So I've got kids now. One of my guys was playing for Sparks and now is in Perfume Genius. One of my old guys is now the music director of, one of the head publicists at Thrill Jockey. We've got jazz musicians and classical performers all over the country. But one of my former students is now going to be the new band director at Xavier. Yeah. But he's got his master's in recording from. Hang on, we've got a folks here. This is no problem. I'm gonna end this as Marlo has to go work. But yeah, this is how long I've been teaching now, and I always tell I'm still friends with my elementary school music teacher since I played Puff. I was Little Jackie Paper and Puff the Magic Dragon.
Yeah, that's awesome.
She calls all my students her grand students, but I taught this guy who's got his master's in Minnesota, Ian McKnight, who's originally went to Xavier. He has his master's. His wife went to Lawrence. They're both musicians. I'm actually going to do a clinic in Minnesota for him soon. But he had a student, when he got his undergrad, he came back and taught at St. Joe's in Appleton. He then taught this kid named Kieran Wallace. So Kieran took lessons from my former student. Then Kieran came and helped work for me when I started the school. Okay. While he was going to St. Norbert's for music. Now Kieran has his master's degree in recording from Berkeley, Spain. Dude. And now is coming back to be the head of the bands at Xavier. Wow. So it's such a weird, that's a grand student of mine who is now the director of Xavier. It's so weird.
That's so cool, man.
But I'm still teaching his youngest sister who's like 9, or no, I'm sorry, Tessa. Tessa's more like 11. Okay. But
it's a big difference.
It is. But thanks so much for having me today, and sorry for my blabbing. But
no. Do you guys have any plans on August 28th? Because we're looking at booking a group here for like an afterglow after the Oshkosh Jazz Festival.
No, we could totally do that. We could totally do that. Perfect. I got to get some guys together and we can put that together for sure. I'd love to do that.
Sweet.
That would be great.
You heard it here.
Kurt Stein School of Music. Find us at kssom.com or on the old Facebook. And thanks so much for having me, Marlo.
Yeah, man. Yeah, pleasure. We'll do it again.
Huevos Rancheros.
All right. Thanks for joining us on episode 21 on the Barkada Podcast, and we'll catch you guys soon on the next one.
Adios. Peace.